Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of SUGTalks. I'm Craig Dale, your host, and together with our special guests, we'll take a deep dive into the topics, challenges and opportunities facing SAP users today. Please make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode. I'm delighted to be joined today by Andy Steer, VP and CTO at NTT Data, Leighton Copp, SAP Program Director at SAP UK&I, and Shin Sawhney, SAP Centre of Excellence Lead at Capgemini UK. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing SAP Project Delivery and how new projects are being delivered post-pandemic and whether a new best practices developed out of the pandemic. And just before we get into that topic, for this week's icebreaker, I thought I'd ask each of you if you could have an unlimited supply of something for the rest of your life, what would it be? So whilst you ponder that, first thing that comes to my mind is the lottery numbers the day before the draw, but I suppose I can't really have that one, so I'm going to go Yorkshire tea. I can't do without Yorkshire tea. I think I'm a simple man. Yorkshire tea would be for me. So let's start with you, Shin.
Oh, well, look. What if I could, and linking a little bit tenuously to Yorkshire, India winning every cricket match they play, and they play loads of them. That's what I'd like. Go on.
Oh, controversial one. Might have to ask the producer to edit that one out. Okay. Leighton.
Oh, mine's an easy one. It would need to be chocolate. Just copious amounts of chocolate. Any chocolate you like, but bring it on.
Enough to bathe in.
Exactly.
And Andy?
I'll keep the sport theme going. People who know me will know that the biggest burden I carry in life is a dedicated fan of the mighty Tottenham Hotspur. So I would have, thanks Shin, I would have to say that a lifetime's continued supply of Harry Kane goals would go down very nicely for me and my two sons. So that's what I'll have, please. A lifetime's worth.
Oh, best of luck with that. Hopefully you might stay on board to deliver that for you. So, well, thanks very much for that, guys. And just moving on to our topic in hand, so to speak. You know, we last discussed project delivery on this podcast back in April 2021, which Andy and Shin, you will probably remember our discussion then. And we kind of focused on the move to remote delivery as a result of the pandemic and the new models that were being utilised and to deliver projects successfully for SAP customers. So I suppose from that, if you could start us off, please, Leighton, how has the delivery of SAP projects changed since then?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because, many of our customers have basically asked us to model what they do themselves, So post-pandemic, we were expecting, obviously during the pandemic, the majority of our customers forced us to do remote working. And then we expected our customers to basically say, come back on site. But the way it actually worked, Craig, was, some of our customers didn't even ask their own employees potentially they needed to come on site, and we reflected that basically. So what we did was we went to very much a model where we had a mix and match. So for those customers, and so we found it also by certain industries as well, where we had key workers like retail, for example, during the pandemic, they were allowed to travel, and their employees were on site also during that time. And then as soon as we were allowed to travel, then we were back on site with those type of customers because we supported what the customer needed. Again, it also depended by customer maturity, SAP maturity I'm talking about. So those customers that have had a longevity with SAP, they were a little bit more relaxed about having remote working, where the types of customers that were potentially net new or brand new customers, I don't suppose they knew exactly what to expect from an SAP implementation and would more often than not expect us to be more on site. So it was very much a hybrid scenario. And basically, to really complete the picture here is, and there is in between as well, where we had certain roles like key decision makers or project managers on site, and then some of the other team members who could work remotely just as effectively were doing so. So we very much modeled what the customer asked us to do.
Oh, thank you. So it kind of if the culture of that organisation, if you like, how they operate, kind of modelled how they wanted the project. So thanks for that, Leighton. And Andy, what have you seen?
So much the same as Leighton's experience. I think I'd maybe add a couple of extra things that we've seen from that. So I guess if we're talking about SAP projects, that's quite a generic term. So let's just split it first of all into, let's say, two categories. So the first one, customers who are starting their journey with SAP. Okay, so people who are implementing, replacing something else, or maybe their organization's grown and it's the first time they're going to have an ERP solution. Then you've got the other camp, which is the existing, I think to use Leighton's phrase, the mature SAP customer who's looking to do an incremental project of some type. Maybe it's a technical led project like an upgrade or something, or maybe it's a more functional led thing. I think we see different behaviors in those two types of situations. So what we've seen with the new customer who's implementing SAP for the first time, there's actually an expectation for full remote. And what I find interesting, or what we found interesting about that, is we have the case studies and we have the testimonials to show that we can do that, right? Because we did it through lockdown. But it's actually not optimal, because at the early part of the project, you've got to build relationships. And those relationships are really strong if they're built face to face. And when you're starting on the project and you're doing the discovery activities and you're trying to align people around a statement of direction, it's really important to be together. So the first learning we found is, if we want to say sort of bounce back from fully remote, that's a scenario where that has to happen. There's no doubt about that. We can deliver without doing it, but we have to get on the front foot and cajole the customer to say, look, this is the benefit of doing it this way. We'll go quicker. The risk will be lower if we do it this way. When things get tough on the project, which they invariably will do, we'll have the relationships to fall back on. So that's important. In the second scenario that I talked about, where it's a mature customer and they've already got SAP and they're looking for incremental things, then the vast majority of those activities can be done in a distributed way. There's no doubt about that at all. And that lowers cost, increases efficiency. So that's been a positive for us. One of the other things I would say briefly is that when you're working on those incremental type projects, what it also allows us to do working remotely is a consultant can work on multiple projects at once without compromising the quality they deliver, because they're not jumping between different customer sites. So I think it's important just to build on what Leighton said, not to contradict in any way, but to build and to say we have these two broadly different scenarios, and one of them is kind of moving back to a balanced model quicker than the other.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Andy. And yeah, I mean, when we look at it from our community perspective, I understand exactly where you're coming from the relationship perspective, especially with a new customer. Those relationships are built face to face. I think, okay, Tinder users might disagree, I suppose, from trying to build a relationship online, but I really feel that the strong relationships are built in that face-to-face environment. And Shin, have you anything to add? Are you seeing?
It's really difficult. It's really difficult to go after those two, because it picked up the points I would have covered. But hey, that's going to happen. But look, let me just add a couple of builds to that. And maybe slightly different to what we've seen from what Andy's just talked about. When we're looking at greenfield projects, we've seen those more in a hybrid approach as opposed to full remote. But absolutely, as Andy and we've seen the same thing. If it's a mature environment, it's projects, it's CRs which can be reasonably large. A lot of those are exclusively remote, but those greenfield things we have seen hybrid manner. And to Leighton's point, I've been in a few offices where I look around and it's just Capgemini people, because the client is still deciding to work remotely, and so we have found some mismatches in the way we think is going to be best to work, and how the client is going to be best to work. But that goes through some education, and these things, the relationships, the water cooler type conversations are really, really important. So some element of face to face, especially greenfield or a major transformation, let's call it a major, whichever way you do it, I think is vital in what we see. And I guess the other thing, to Andy's point on the consultant saving time and being able to mutualize things, absolutely, and clearly there's a link to the sustainability angle there, right, as well, that people aren't traveling, saving CO2 emissions, etc., which is good for the planet.
Yeah, I was just actually, Shin, I was going to agree with you on the sustainability point, to be frank. Through lockdown, we implemented a new working model in our business called Work Where It Works, which is all about giving the employees and our colleagues the freedom to make the decisions about where works best for them, for the customer that they're working with. And the upside on sustainability has been huge. The miles, I guess, simple terms, the miles that have been taken off the road, right, for people traveling, those hotel nights, all of those kind of things, they've just been removed. And we're increasingly seeing now that when we start conversations with customers about delivery practices, they're asking us about sustainability. So I think that there's a push and a pull there. We're saying, look, this is a more sustainable way to deliver projects. Customers are asking for it as well. So we've started doing some rough calculations around the net zero project, right? So if you're delivering a project for a customer, how can you minimize the emissions from all the activities involved in that? And we're seeing some really positive things coming out of that. So I'm really pleased you mentioned that, Shin, because it's a really important point.
I mean, if I could just come back, there's something else that's important here as well. Look, it also depends. If I think about our team, and we've all got similar working practices of what makes sense for the consultant and for the client. But for some people, remote working isn't easy, right? Because they're sitting in, they might be both, partners who are sitting in a flat. One's on one side of the table, one's on the other side, on calls all the time. You can't hear yourself think. It's not easy for everybody. So we got to bear that in mind, to the point you made, Andy, about what's right for the consultant, over the kind of lifetime of a project.
We've seen some interesting developments there actually in exactly that point, because particularly for younger colleagues who are perhaps fresher into, not saying giving anything away, but perhaps fresher in the workplace than we are, what we found is that although we're perhaps or perhaps we're not with the customer, so we can be remote as a team and work together, which helps with that. And then we've got the other mode where we're fully distributed, right, where everybody is in their own home or wherever they want to work. So we've found making our offices available for project teams to come together, not necessarily every day, but come together on a regular basis to get that identity and make sure that culture doesn't slip away. Because Shin, you're absolutely right. If everybody's, not everybody's got the luxury, like Craig, of a nice wood panelled office at home. Some people, when you jump on the Teams, some people when you jump on the Teams call, they're perched on the edge of their bed.
Yeah, indeed.
So we do have to be understanding of that, I think.
Well, the wood panelling's there instead of the mirrors. You really don't want to see the back of my head. But thanks for that, guys. So what I'm hearing, kind of what's come out of this, comments there, work where it works, the sustainability angle on projects, the hybrid way of working is potentially, or is definitely, the optimal way, perhaps. So you mentioned, Andy, a number of different elements in the relationship building, discovery phase, etc. So from, I suppose, if we're looking at that optimal delivery model, are you all agreeing on the way Andy mentioned about those early phases, or is there anything else to throw into the mix?
Well, if I can just jump in, yeah, absolutely. I think around the different phases, we are noticing that on the majority of our projects post-pandemic, where we have our explore or blueprinting phases or the design phase, we're finding it's better to work together on site to really to bottom out those topics that really need some of those difficult conversations and face-to-face whiteboarding, where you can design in a free format way some of the options that would be beneficial to the customer. And then looking at when we then go into the build phase slightly later, then yes, we can push some of those topics more conveniently to a remote setup. But in saying that, again, it depends on the role again, because often when we look at things like, typically when we're in build or testing, when we're looking at root cause analysis, for example, we have found that we definitely benefit from being face-to-face or closer to each other when it comes to communicating some of those quick resolution times. So again, it's different in each scenario, but equally I think it's about being flexible across all these models and listening to what the customer's asking for and understanding what's needed by each of these individuals in the customer team. Again, whether we're in discovery or run phase right the way through, we're finding that many of project management or typical status type meetings where we're having conversations with the customer about issues, risks, status, next phase planning, etc. We seem to be having more face-to-face conversations rather than some of the other typical development type work, which is still remote.
I think there's absolutely pinch points, which I think, Leighton, is what you're saying. Through the ebb and flow, if you like, of a project, there are well, I guess let's call them high touch points, right? Where you really want to be in the room having the discussion. And I mean, if you've got an organizational change management stream going through this as well, then I think we all know that it's much easier to convince people and to explain to people face to face than it is on a Teams call. That's for sure. I think the understanding, I think, of the ebbs and flows of those projects and the benefits of those touch points, I think that's the key thing you have to get across to customers who may, the engagement with us might be the exception to their working practice, right? So they may have a very well developed remote working practice on their side now that they developed in lockdown. And we're coming in and we're effectively disrupting that because we're saying, well, we'd like your people on site with us. So often you have to convince them that they need to bring people together. And I think that can be, where we've had challenges early on, I think it's been around those types of conversations where we've said, we want to run this workshop, and the customer will say, okay, sure, I can put a Teams camera at the front of the room and my people will dial in remotely. And we're like, well, no, can't they? We'd like them to come and join the meeting, please. Oh, I don't know if we can do that. We'll have to ask carefully because everyone works remotely now. So I think that's a learning, right? Because that organisation is looking for us to help them understand the best way to deliver the project. And there needs to be give and take on both sides.
And just jumping in there, Andy, it's interesting because you're right. What we've learned is we using MS Teams, etc. is typically how is our application of choice. But it's building the rigor and structured approach into the meeting hygiene that more than we did before has really been beneficial. And one last point on that is that even candidates now that we're interviewing are asking us more often than not, is especially for these consulting type roles, is it a remote role? And the benefit of that for us is that we are potentially recruiting candidates that may not apply for those roles because they didn't want to be 80% on the road, but we're now attracting great candidates who, because we are able to offer these remote type consulting positions. So it's beneficial to us also.
Just a couple of builds from me. You talked about the project phases and the requirements and getting people together is important, and clearly in the testing parts. But what we find, you're building solutions. It depends on the maturity and the understanding of the customer. You're building solutions, and actually, what we want to do and what we typically do is demonstrate the solutions. We don't just take the requirements, go off and build it, and come back and you test it and go, well, that's not what I wanted. We want to do that as we go along, and then the power of the group comes in to those conversations and makes that a much better experience. So when they come to testing, it's something they're expecting, the solution they're expecting. There's you're reducing the amount of surprises that you get. And the other point, Teams is an important thing. Other things like Mural and all these kind of collaboration tools are really important, and not just using them, but preparing to use them properly. I've seen lots of meetings where we'll stick on some notes and off you go, and it's a complete mess. You have to structure it just like you would a workshop face to face. If you're doing it remotely, you need to think, plan all of those things the same, whether it's remote or if it's working together face to face.
Shin, I'd agree with that massively. I think there's an interesting point I think embedded within that, which is, what are we not doing? We're not doing what we did before just at the end of a Teams call, because it fundamentally doesn't work that way. So we talked, I guess, Craig, your initial question was like a general working practices. What are we seeing on the balance of remote? I think when you go below that, the fundamentals of how we work have changed. Because as Leighton said, you want to be in the room with the whiteboard. Well, what if you can't? Because if it's just for half an hour, you're not going to meet up on site if it's 250 miles away. So how do we simulate those things? So as Shin was mentioning, things like Mural for whiteboarding and ideation sessions, those sorts of things are invaluable. The ability to be able to record meetings, using automatic transcript through meetings so that you get your notes from the meetings done. All those things are great. The one final thing that I was going to mention when Leighton said it, which I think is a really important point as well, is this idea that I'm not great for saying that things are default, but if we say, for example, the default mold of a consultant has shifted now to be more remote, what I see that doing without a shadow of a doubt is introducing more diversity into the structure of the teams, because those jobs will now be more applicable for a wider range of people. And that's not just, clearly there's an obvious statement to make about gender diversity, but there's also a statement about people who have a different requirement for work-life balance. Maybe they have caring responsibilities. Maybe they've just done enough years on the road and they just don't want to do it anymore. And I think we've started to see that mix changing. And I think that's only a positive, because the more diverse your teams are, the better you are at coming up with different thinking and different ways of doing things. So I think that's been an essential change.
I couldn't agree more, Andy. Absolutely, that is something that we have noticed significantly around, the diversity and the mix of the team. We have seen that definitely on our projects post-pandemic.
Quite interesting. It's fascinating listening to you guys talk about that, because what I'm kind of picking up here is quite a number of lessons that have perhaps been learned along the way to where we are now, about that balance of kind of on-site and remote, that hybrid approach, but also, how projects can, be delivered more sustainably, how teams can be made more diverse because of that remote working and that needs requirements.
Hi, we're the UK and Ireland SAP user group. Did you know we're a fiercely independent not-for-profit? Did you know we're a vibrant community of over 6,500 SAP users? And did you know we help each other by sharing resources, championing education and influencing SAP's future development? Well, you do now. If you'd like to get the most from your SAP investments and be in the know, visit our website, sapusers.org/pod. We hope you enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Are there any other, just coming back to you, Shin, if I may, any other particular lessons that have been learned along the way, do you think, that perhaps haven't been discussed so far?
I mean, we talked about the tooling being important, and I think the other thing is, even if we're doing things remote, finding ways to, I talked about water cooler conversation, having that interaction is really important. So some mechanism to get some informal communication going to build a team, even if you're remote, we found that's been very useful and important as well. So sometimes we're having meetings, it's not to talk about the project, it's to talk about something that one of the teams decided, right, that's your job to do it. And that fun element, bring in as you would do, you'd go into it. I was in an office yesterday, a massive office, a load of people fasting at the time. And you could have these laughs and jokes with people that, if you get onto keys, right, what's the agenda? Bang, 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 here we go. Right, that's your action, that's your action. It loses that kind of team spirit, which I think is important to work a way to build that in.
And you're right, Shin. I think to complement what you said there, the way that we summarize it is the eyes and ears on the ground, and that, that coffee corner chat where you pick up more from the project DNA or the relationships that the customer have with their colleagues. Potentially we miss out on that by being remote, so we do have to find other ways to make sure we still stay in touch, or we try and foster those relationships with not just our colleagues but our partners and customers together. Right? It's really fundamentally important.
So there's a couple of sort of lessons learned, right, Craig? So here's a couple of interesting things that we learned through this. If we're going on site and we're walking to a physical meeting room, you and I probably bumped in at the coffee machine, and we were talking about the football on the way to the meeting room. Then we get in the meeting room, we sit down, we can start the meeting. If that meeting's on Teams, then the first 2, 3, 4 minutes of that meeting has to be small talk. Otherwise, the relationship gets binned. The culture falls off on the project if we don't have those chats while we start the meeting. So Time is an absolute key thing. You have to adjust your expectation of what you can achieve online. You have to allow space. You have to allow a little bit more freedom. It can't be driven, if you like, in the same way that it would be if we were in a face-to-face meeting. So that's the first one. The second one is management overhead. Systems need to evolve, and as Shin's mentioned already, you need to evolve the way in which you work together. But also there's a very real danger that project and program managers can fall into a micromanagement approach because they can't see the people. So they wonder what's happening. Whereas we've all been in large project rooms where people walk the corners, right? You can walk around, you can pop your head up, go to get a coffee, and on the way back you can see who's got their heads down doing stuff and who's perhaps struggling, because you can get it from the body language. If you can't see the people, you can't get that. And if you're not disciplined, the danger is you trip into micromanagement. I want to call at the start of the day, I want to call at the end of the day, and let's have a stand up at lunchtime and all these sort of things. So that can be a real problem. So we've had to work very, I'll say this is fair. We've worked hard to support our project and program leadership to make sure that we don't fall into those traps, because I think it's very easy to do. So we've had to work hard to make sure we don't do that. And touch wood, I think we've done okay so far, but we do recognise that's a continual risk when you can't walk the corners and just chat with people.
I think that.
Go on, Leighton.
Sorry, go on. And what I was just about to say, right, to Andy's point is, you're absolutely right, because what I think we've learned is to build more trustful, respectful relationships remotely, because what we are finding, and as Andy, to your point, when we were fully remote or when we were in lockdown, people were spending time, they were almost getting up and going straight onto their laptops, right? And they were immediately starting work. At the end of the day, they would go straight from their laptop to about 3 seconds walk to the dining room with their family, right? And there was no break, or we couldn't easily see that downtime that we would naturally get if we were in an office environment. And what we were cognizant of is really having or encouraging people to take that time out, to block some time also in their calendars, and for a number of reasons. First of all, to to decompress a little, to allow us to get back into our family life, and more about building those trustful relationships, so that sometimes you would take a break in the middle of the day to walk the dog, more than we've never been able to do that before, and yet be there when we need to be delivering our, make sure our deliverables are on time and we're attending those meetings that we need to be, but still have that flexibility to do those other things which help us with our mindfulness, or a better work-life balance, to make sure that we are still delivering as best we can.
I mean, Leighton, that's a really good point. The mental well-being of people is really, really important. I mean, and also if I think back to the good old days when we were 4 days a week on project or 5 days a week, when you had those, you had challenges then about people's travel, and we tried to work a way to say you got fatigue from doing that. We went to the other extreme where everybody was remote and you got fatigue from doing that. You have to be thinking about the impact, whichever way you're working is having, and building strategies and mechanisms and things that help alleviate whatever the stress is, whether it's from the travel or it's from just going 2 steps to my dining room and then going 3 steps to my bedroom. So you've always got to be thinking about, especially on the mental well-being, thinking about the person's mental well-being, and how they're coping with whichever mechanism you did it. We had the same issues when we were in the good old days pre-pandemic, and it's the same kind of thing, different issues, but we've got to think the same way about how do we make this better.
This is the thing, right? So historically, I mean, we are social creatures, right, by nature. And I guess the problem is, historically, maybe on some of those projects, maybe sometimes we were too social, hotel bars, etc. The risk now, of course, is that we're not social enough, where people feel isolated. So I think at the core of it, Craig, it's delivering the projects, delivering the customer success, but balancing that element, because the face-to-face, the social element is such a critical part of the success of the kind of activities that we're involved in, both success in the customer's eyes, but then also internally on our side, success. Are people all burnt out at the end of the projects? Are they delivering the best that they can? Are they progressing in their chosen path in their careers? All of those things are incredibly important. We know it's hard to get good talent at the moment because the market is so hyped. So, the people that you've got, looking after them and making sure that they're enjoying what they're doing is a huge, huge focus for us, as I know it is for many other partners in the space as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just on that point, obviously we brought the customer side into it as well. And we talked earlier about I think Leighton, when Leighton opened up, talking about the customer kind of culture and the way the customer wanted things to work, and how are customers kind of seeing the new model? How are they reacting to it? Is it a positive for them? Are you seeing more positivity coming from your customers now? Is the new model helping you deliver projects quicker and therefore more efficiently for customers? Obviously, we've already touched on the sustainability piece, but how are customers receiving it, Shin? Are you getting any feedback?
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to the maturity of the company, because it's not just us as a industry partners that have gone through this learning. Our customers have gone through a hell of a learning as well. I think it was your point, Andy, earlier, that organizations have got their own practices, and project work could be slightly different. We are seeing a variety of those mechanisms. Some guys, some customers have got it really well defined, aligned, and working well, and they're monitoring it and adapting and changing, and others aren't. And that can be problematic because it feeds into the project work that we end up doing, or some of the challenges that we have. I can't remember which one of you guys touched on it early on, the change management aspect. When we're dealing with solutions like SAP, it's not a simple thing. These are business transformation, typically transformational projects, where you're taking people on a very different journey to, just here's a little bit of a new tool, and you've got to bear that in mind. And customers, maturity of customers is always varied, and in this case it equally varies. You've got to look at that and understand that. And when we go into clients, we one of the first sets of questions is, how is it best, what is working for you, what is not working for you, so we can adapt and amend our models for that. Some organizations are, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday on site. It's simple as that. And others are more flexible. Some are, look, if it's an easy stuff, I'm not going to come in because I live 200 miles away. Because all of the points we made about the diversity, and the type of people we get, equally it's the same thing for the clients as well. They're getting people that, new people, new types of people, diverse communities that they probably didn't attract before, but now with the ability to work home, why can't they? So I guess what I'm saying is, when we think about it from our partner view, but whatever we just said over the last half an hour probably equally applies a lot to our customers too.
Yeah.
And I think, what, when we look at some of our cloud solutions, all right, even before the pandemic, when we look at the solutions like Ariba, they would take like 18 to 24 months, or Concur 12 weeks to implement, all remote. These were remote pre-pandemic. So, those working styles have been known for some time. So they weren't new when we went through the pandemic. And you know what? Okay, some of the hybrid models like for SuccessFactors, where there was a mixture of remote, pre the pandemic, there was a mixture of remote and on-site. Then yes, I think what we're seeing is customers asking typically more remote type work, because they are proven to be extremely successful implementing well. So again, it depends on the type of solution. And as you say, as we move to these cloud-based solutions, it's becoming a lot easier.
I think it was mentioned earlier on that when it comes to both their own internal working practices and their desire for what they expect from their partners, there is a massive variation across industry, because the different industries were impacted by COVID in very different ways. I think it was Shin who was talking about, retail being a prime example of that. So what we've found is that for many organizations, they would never have dreamt of doing things remotely, but then they had no choice. So for a lot of organizations, it was a gradual evolution driven by the kinds of things we've been talking about: productivity, work-life balance, the practicalities of cloud-based delivery. A lot of customers were on that journey at their own pace, step by step, and felt good that they were prepared well for what was coming in the changing working practices brought on by the pandemic. Then on the flip side of that, you've got the organisations that just had to do it binary. They were like, no, we want everybody on site every day. That's the way that we work. And then all of a sudden, we've had to shut down our offices. How are we going to deliver this? So for us, actually, there are some upsides to the experience, because what we found is that was the proof point that some of our existing customers required. We'd have never been able to do it incrementally with them, but they had to do it very quickly, and we kept delivering for them through that period. So now they're more than happy to accept that we can deliver in that way. They don't question it. And in fact, interestingly, some of them are the strongest proponents for pushing back when we say we need to come on site for a few days to do this thing or that thing. because they I think some of them, the thought is binary. It's like an all or nothing. So I think that's been a learning on the customer side. But I have to say, Craig, as was said by Leighton and by Shin, there's no such thing as a typical customer. Even you can think you've got a standard style with a particular customer, and then there's an organizational change, and all of a sudden somebody says, well, actually, I prefer doing it this way. And we've always, project organizations, professional services organizations, you've always got that baked in. You always know you need to be flexible and agile depending on the whims of the different organizations. And the success is born out of our ability to think quickly and adapt to those things. So although this is an exponential version of those typical challenges, nonetheless, it is still that same kind of challenge. And I think we've all reacted well and coped with it. And the customers are still doing the projects. And there's nothing more to say than that, really.
Well, just one small bit on top of what you just said there, Andy. It's sometimes the organisation, it's sometimes individuals. New CIO comes in, new CFO comes in, and it's, oh, that's not how we're going to do it. We're going to do it this way. So it's actually linked not just to the organisation or the industry. Sometimes it's linked to the individual and the character of that individual.
Thanks. And while we're on that, on the customer side of things, and being that customer's trusted partner on their journey, so we recently released a certifications paper that we co-authored with SAP, which we developed to help customers ensure that they choose a partner that's got the right capabilities and experience with them to ensure their projects are successful. Now, kind of in this new way of working, if you like, do you have any advice for customers when embarking on the project to ensure that they've got the right team alongside them on their journey? Now, I don't want any of the three of you to say, yes, choose our company and our team.
Damn. Okay.
Leighton.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually, Craig. That's a good point. SAP has had to provide a lot of enablement for partners. I think we've got our PDM role, the Partner Delivery Manager, who is responsible for cloud solutions, making sure the partners have the skills needed to deliver these cloud projects. And going back to what you were saying, for example, over the last 2 years, there's been a big push to increase the number of certified consultants in all solution areas by a factor of 4. And the PDM role, the Partner Delivery Manager, is facilitating this activity within the partner community. And also, SAP has developed the Partner Academy for those people who want to retrain or start their SAP career. And so individuals go through an education and training that's available often online, and then these individuals and candidates are there and available for our partners to hire. So there's two things there. There's the increased certification, as you talked about, Craig, but also these partner academies that have been developed in the last 2 years also to support this training and education.
Andy, any advice?
Well, we clearly avail ourselves of all of the training and all the support that we can get our hands on from SAP. I think, frankly, I just think you have to. I don't think there's any real debate around that. I mean, the value is huge, the cost is low, so it's a bit of a no-brainer, really, that you have to do these things. I think on the customer side, you would like to think that customers will always invest as much as we think they should invest within the projects, but we forget that sometimes that they have businesses to run as well, and it's not always easy for them to do that. I think flexibility, different learning channels, different routes for people to learn things, I think is exceptionally important. And as much as we try to highlight how important that is at the beginning of a relationship, I think we all know that sometimes your real proof point to needing to learn something comes at the point when you realise you don't know it rather than right at the beginning of the journey. And sometimes in all honesty, that is a learning from these things, that often there's a bit of a scramble for people to bring themselves up to speed at the pace required on the projects. But that's always been true on these large projects, right? The demands on the customer, we should never sort of hide those away. You do have to put work in, but to Leighton's point, the materials, the environment to learn these things, there'd never been more opportunities and easier ways of learning and bringing your people up to speed. So you just have to make sure you're focused on that and that you're open to the suggestions.
Okay, if I go back to the question, I think you asked about what a customer should be thinking about with their partner. So clearly the knowledge, the certifications as evidence. I mean, we've invested, just like most people have, we've invested, top 3 level of certifications across the globe. But it's not just the certifications, it's that experience, that expertise with the solutions. And there's one really important point that we see time and time again, that our customers need to understand. You want somebody working with you who knows your industry, who understands your industry, because there are certain nuances in life sciences. There are certain industries in manufacturing, complex manufacturing, in public sector, that you want to be speaking the same language, not just technically, but from a business viewpoint. That from a client's perspective, I think should be something that they should be looking for, as well as clearly on top of certifications and the relevant solutions expertise.
Sorry if I just say, Craig, because I was building on the customer side enablement piece. Shin's absolutely right. I think that the reality is it's incredibly difficult often for a new customer to the world of SAP to decide who's best placed to help them. I think that is difficult because it's very... There's a risk of the naive buyer, right? And I think that's a real challenge for existing customers who've had SAP for a long time, who perhaps have their own center of expertise. I think it's easier for them to know what they're looking for and therefore to find the right thing. So, as Shin was saying, referenceability, industry expertise, consulting capability, relationship to SAP. I think those things are all critical and fundamental to choosing the right partner to work with. And I guess from the conversation we've been having today about these different ways of working, I think, somebody culturally that you can fit with, right? Because ultimately, it's not a game of top trumps. How many CX consultants? We've got 95 or we've got 92. Well, 95 wins. It's not like that. There's a level of competency that you can expect across to be frank, the partners that SAP would recommend. Right? So they would say, well, here's 3 partners who've got expertise in this industry. They should all do a good job for you. What you need to look for is culturally, who's going to be the best fit for you, who's going to work in the way that you want to work. And if you have a vision as to how you want your project to be delivered, you have to be prepared to flex that. You have to be prepared to take input from the partner. But let's be realistic. Don't find somebody who you're arguing with tooth and nail on day one and your poles apart in how you should deliver a project. So look for that cultural fit, because a lot of the other things, they're not necessarily table stakes, but when you get a recommendation of partners from SAP, they become more like table stakes. So look for the differentiators, which often are cultural, or as Shin said, niche industry, like micro industry strong plays. You might be a retailer, but are you a food and bev retailer? Because that's going to be slightly different and have slightly more skills required. So I think it's really drilling down on the culture and the specific expertise. Those would be my things.
Just one quick build, and we've all kind of agreed with each other and built on each other's points. One thing you just said there, Andy, you talked about with clients who've got centers of expertise and the level of maturity. In fact, we've seen in a number of those that, yes, they've got center of expertise, so you think they know what they should be looking for, but actually a number of those have got a knowledge of working of how SAP used to work, or the old way of working, not how you would build SAP today and should do. And therefore, actually, sometimes those guys or those teams, might not have the right approach to picking the partner, because they're still thinking the old way, not the new way.
So that's where you're right. So you're absolutely right. But you know what? I'm going to disagree with you. You're right in what you say, but that just stresses even more the importance of the cultural piece, because you're going to have to argue with those people.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that, if you can't relate to them and understand that they're feeling challenged and threatened, then you're never going to cross that bridge. So you've got to give them a bit to begin with. You've got to say, we appreciate your position. We understand this is difficult, that things are changing. We can help you manage the change. We can help you evolve, your work patterns. It doesn't mean, you were a specialist petrol and diesel MOT centre and now all the cars have gone electric, so bye-bye. It's not that situation, but you're right. I think those challenges are there, but that puts even more impetus, I think, on us to make sure that we work well with those people to help them on that journey, for sure.
Thank you. And, thank you all very much. And as we come to a close now, is there anything else that you would like to share that we haven't discussed so far? I think, some incredible insights from you all in this conversation, and just thought I'd give you one last opportunity if there's anything perhaps that, any wisdom to impart on our listeners before we close.
What I would say is we've talked a lot about sort of how we changed, prompted a lot of the time by what was going on during the pandemic. I think we've talked a lot about culture. We've talked a lot about how to fit with customers. And what I would say is, I think what the last few years have taught us is that there's a range of ways now that we can work together, that it isn't a binary thing. And I think what's important is that we all take the learnings and the pluses and minuses of all those different styles of engagement to be able to bring the correct blend together with the customer, because I've never felt more positive about our ability to deliver successful projects to customers. The point that we're in now with the evolution of the technologies, the demands that we're seeing from customers and industry, and the general drive for business transformation that we're seeing, blended with our ability now through the work-life balance things to recruit and hold on to exceptional people. I think the ingredients are there for fantastic recipes for these projects, but it's just about talking, understanding, building up what that right engagement model is for the particular project that you're on. And I think there's huge opportunity.
So look, there's a thought there. You asked about final thoughts. If I look across Europe, we're involved in 500 plus S4 type implementations. I guess the point I'm seeing is that no two of them are really the same. There are nuances, and just like the cultures across organizations are different. No two projects are the same. They're not starting from the same start point. They're not trying to end up they're all trying to end up what they think is the intelligent enterprise or renewable enterprise, but that means different things to different people. So when you're going through this process and look at the project, look at the vision of what you're trying to do, what we're seeing, that the ones that are the most successful is where they're linking that transformation to the business vision, the strategy, and the outcomes they're looking to go. That's really important. But no two journeys across, the clients that we see are exactly the same. Some are hugely different.
Thank you. Well, Andy, Leighton, Shin, thank you so much for your time and your insights today. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And to our listeners, I hope you found that valuable. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and you got value from listening to everything we've discussed over the past 45 minutes or so. So thank you very much. And until the next time, stay safe, stay well, and keep washing your hands.